Hello, my name is William, the Avid reader, and today I'm reviewing Keep the Aspidistra Flying, written by George Orwell in 1936. So this is George Orwell's third novel and fourth book, and it's about a man who likes poverty and doesn't like the middle class lifestyle. He doesn't like the decent gentleman people and things like that, and he hates the money god. He thinks that people worship money too much, and he thinks that everything is connected to money. And he's got this girlfriend kind of character and a few friends who are trying to prevent him from going down this dumb path. So, before I continue, there will be spoilers in this review. So there are several characters actually, pretty well developed. The protagonist of the story is called Gordon Comstock, so he's this poetry writer. By the way, I don't like poetry, so yeah, he's the thing with poetry is where he writes this thing called London Pressures, which he never gets finished. And he's a nihilist. You've got his love interest, girlfriend kind of character called Rosemary. So she's from some other family, more middle class, I think. And she sees him from time to time. He thinks she won't have sex with him because he doesn't have any money and won't marry him because of that either. But she's quite tolerant of his stupidity, so yeah, she's kind of a good character. Then you've got his sister Julia, who's a working class girl, but she sacrifices everything so Gordon can have a bright future. So for example, pays for his private schools, things like that. Loans him a bunch of money which will never be repaid so he can take care of himself. Then we got the friend called Ravelstone. So that's the most frequent friend we see Gordon having. So he's a wealthy left-wing publisher who publishes the newspaper The Antichrist. And he's a friend and he's pretty nice to him and talks about socialism and things like that, but says that Gordon is sometimes wrong to think of say certain things, but he will not dare contradict Gordon directly, so he says indirectly and tries to be nice, but he's a good, wealthy socialist fellow. Then we get to see the bookshop owners. He works in a couple of bookshops, so there's McKenny, so that's the better quality bookshop, and then there's also Cheeseman, that's the lower quality bookshop. He also lives for a while at this housing place with the landlady, Mrs. Wisbeach, and she's a strict landlady, so no women or things like that, and you only get your meal before a certain time, so yeah. And then there's also this company, they talk about new Avion advertising. And here there's a couple of people irrelevant. So you got Flaxman, who's kind of a friend. He's a fat guy, good humored. And then there's also Mr. Esking, who operates there, some executive guy, and liked Gordon working there. So get into the story. So as I said, so we get the backstory in the second chapter, I think, about how his family came from. His grandparent, I think it was, had 13 kids or something like that. A lot of kids, if I remember right. The same thing, and he had a lot of brothers too. But he was some middle class guy, but he didn't want his children to succeed really. Very few of them had children, with the exception of the only offspring, the only grandchildren he got were Gordon and Julia. And Gordon and Julia, who are both middle-aged, around 30 I think, have not produced offspring either, and they're all dead. And he talks also about how Gordon used to work for this advertising agency, but he then decided to quit because he hated the dishonest money-making business and the so-called decent gentlemanry. And this is where he had his buddy Flaxman work, and Mr. Eskin said he can always come back to get a job there. So he goes and works for a bookshop under Mr. McKenny, who's a lazy guy. And the first chapter is about how he sells a bunch of books, helps people with books and recommends books and things like that. And so you can see he's got a pretty boring life. His flat is pretty bad. Then one time he makes some money off some poetry he gets, so he gets drunk, spends it all away, and then he loses his job because of it, and he gets to work for an even less good bookshop. The girlfriend character he's got, we hear about her, but we only get to see her after 100 pages of the book has gone. So a third of the book she's not even in it directly, and they go on some trip together that went good on the morning, but then they went to some restaurant, and he's always talking about these money grubbing people, and everything's related to money. You would respect me if I had money, and he ruins everything again. And he wants to have her sexually, but she says no and acquiesces, but then changes her mind. It's a bunch of weird stuff. So when he got drunk, he ended up in prison, so he lost his job, and he had to work for a worse bookshop. But before that, he got to live at Ravelstone's place, and Ravelstone was quite friendly about it, but there was some tensions between both of them, and I think Gordon has created a lot of problems. He's very self-destructive. So he gets the job at a second bookshop, and he also has his circle around him deteriorating, so 3 people want to see him, so you've got Ravelstone the body, but their relationship is basically destroyed. Julia and Rosemary, the only ones around, and he gets to have Rosemary at his flat that is in worse quality, but it's at least more free to do what you want. So he has sex with her, and she gets pregnant. The end of the book is about, will he have the baby the child aborted, or what if the fetus, whatever you believe it is, or will he have it and marry her? So, but to do that, he has to go, because she will lose her job, he has to go to work at the advertising firm New Abrion. So he does some thinking about it, takes about a night, and he goes to the library, looks at pictures of fetuses. He thinks they're a bit grotesque, but they look human enough, so he decides that he'll marry her. They are going to have their child eventually. He gets back to work at the advertising firm, and it ends with the book. He keeps talking about these aspidistras, which is some kind of plant you hang in your window. He mentions that money and aspidistras are the most common things he talks about. Either everything's connected to money, or you have to be a good middle class person, gentleman, you have to have a aspidistra. So the book ends with them having bought their own nice flat now, some good furniture, and they quarrel about the Aspidistra. And the ending of this book is the closest to a happy ending I've seen in an Orwell story. It's weird. It's not really a happy ending, but it's not a bad one necessarily, especially if you think about it objectively of how it will turn out for him. So how would I rate Keep the Aspidistra Flying by George Orwell? I would say 8 out of 10. So it's not as good as Burmese Days or Coming Up for Air. It's much better than A Clergyman's Daughter. I don't get it. Orwell didn't like this book for some reason. I think he's wrong. It's maybe like Stephen King in the Shining movie. Yeah, sometimes even masters of their craft don't realize the brilliancy of their own creations. And yes, it's a good book. 8 out of 10. A good novel. Starts out a bit, doesn't start out so great. Starts out a bit like The Clergyman's Daughter in the sense that it's slow, a bit boring, but Coming Up for Air was kind of like that too. But they build on both Coming Up for Air and Keep the Aspidistra Flying. They both keep improving. So, and it turns out to be a good book and gets better and better, and we get to see his self-destructive behavior, but at the end it reverts and everything is logical, and there's a lot of foreshadowing because a lot of things are repeated, so it makes sense in the end how it turns out. So if you ask me how I would rank this as an Orwell book, now I've read all his fiction works, I think, so if I just took the fiction now, I put 1984 number 1, and I know for number 2, but these two I won't review since I've already read them in last year, so just mentioning the ones I've read so far. So I'm gonna keep the Aspidistra Flying above Clergyman's Daughter, much higher, but slightly under Coming Up for Air, and then also under Burmese Days. So yeah, good book. Definitely recommend it. And here, it's not really political. This one, there's not really a theme of authoritarianism. It's more about the working class worshipping thing. So it's more a socio-economic thing. But yeah, it's still a pretty good book. So 8 out of 10. So George Orwell, another good book you've written. A lot of good books you've written. So that was the Avid Reader's review of Keep the Aspidistra Flying, written by George Orwell in 1936. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I will see you guys next time.